When the Grim Reaper comes a-knockin', some people don't just answer, they kick the door in. It doesn't matter if it's an enemy horde, a crooked justice system, or nature itself. Like a true action hero, they just grin and say, "Bring it on." Find out who these incredible heroes were and how many lives they saved or took with them on this episode of The Infographic Show, Most Epic Deaths in History. Number 13. Ben Cockrum. Back in 1922, the Canadian wilderness was not for the faint of heart. Ben Cockrum was a fur trapper working on the banks of Lake Winnipeg to capture animals and bring their pelts back to earn his pay. But for some of the local wildlife, he wasn't the predator, he was the prey. While wolves are usually cautious hunters who avoid humans, a large pack of wolves set upon Cockrum and quickly overwhelmed him. It seemed the hapless trapper was doomed to be wolf chow, but he would make them work for their supper that day. Cockrum drew his rifle and dropped 7 wolves with pinpoint shots, an incredible feat given the size of the pack. But they kept on coming, and he was quickly out of ammo, so rather than accept his fate, he put his rifle to another use. He started bludgeoning the wolves to death, sending 4 more to the big pound in the sky. Ultimately, the injuries Ben Cockrum suffered overwhelmed him, and he met his end, with his body being found amongst the bodies of 11 wolves he killed that day. We're betting legends of this warrior of the North are still whispered among the locals today, and probably the wolves too. But sometimes the most impressive heroes of all don't fight, they just resist. Number 12. Giles Corey. Salem was a town on the edge, paralyzed by fear, suspicion, and mass hysteria. The Massachusetts colony was gripped by a witchcraft panic, and to the townspeople, witches weren't just stories, they were real, and they were everywhere. It didn't matter if there was no evidence, all it took was an accusation from a rival or a frightened child. Trials were quick and usually had one verdict, guilty, and one sentence, death by hanging. Most of the accused were women, but one man found himself in the middle of all this. Giles Corey, and he would put the entire process to shame. Corey was a farmer with a troubled past, facing minor criminal charges for vagrancy and petty theft. He even went to trial for murdering a servant who stole from him but was acquitted. But it would come back to haunt him. By the time he was 80, Corey and his wife were swept up in the hysteria of the witch trials. At first, he supported the court. He even believed the accusations against his own wife. But everything changed when they turned on him. When Corey was accused of witchcraft himself, he refused to confess. A guilty plea was required to proceed to sentencing. The judge ordered that they get a confession out of Giles, and by any means necessary. A sadistic method of coercion was used. A prisoner would be stripped naked, placed under heavy boards, and have boulders laid on top, crushing them to death. Most prisoners quickly confessed, but Corey lasted over 2 days. When he was asked for a confession, Corey would only reply with 2 words, "More weight." As he grew weaker and weaker, he would repeat those words until he died after extended torture. Because he never confessed, his estate was protected from seizure, but it was reported that the sheriff took it anyway. The historic record now believes that he was an innocent man, just like everyone else killed in Salem. And it just goes to show there is no scenario where a hero can't emerge. Number 11. Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt. It was good to be a Vanderbilt in 1915. As one of the richest families in the world, they had a lot of power. And Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt was one of their shining stars. The 3rd son of Cornelius Vanderbilt II, he was an avid sportsman and traveled the world. Due to a death and disinheritance, Alfred was in line to inherit the lion's share of his father's fortune. Despite this, he spent his days working a modest desk job at the railroad that he would one day inherit a huge portion of. He was considered one of the more ethical and forthright of the family, and they would be proven right in a big way. World War I was raging in Europe in 1915 when Vanderbilt boarded the RMS Lusitania for a business trip. He traveled in first class with his valet, Roland Denier, leaving his family back home, which was lucky because disaster was about to strike. In one of the acts that would pull the U.S. into World War I, the Germans struck the civilian ocean liner with a torpedo. The boat was sinking fast and there was no way everyone could get off. Fortunately, as a first-class passenger, Vanderbilt would have had first dibs on the lifeboats. But what happened next shocked everyone. Vanderbilt and his valet delayed their own departure, helping people off into crafts. Then Vanderbilt encountered a young woman who was begging for help to get her baby off the boat. He promised to locate an extra life jacket for her, but was unable to. Not willing to let this woman and baby die, he gave her his own life jacket. There was just one problem with this. Vanderbilt couldn't swim, and he knew that this would spell his end. Vanderbilt's body was never found, but eyewitnesses said he and Denier were on board helping people escape to the bitter end. And these next heroes didn't just save people, they may have saved countries. Number 10. The village of Eyam. During the Middle Ages, village life in England focused on farming, trading, and generally trying to survive. But once in a while, the outside world would rudely intrude on them, be it through war or plague, and that was the case for the village of Eyam in 1665, a small parish in Derbyshire Dales. Mostly isolated, death came to the village when the local tailor received a parcel of clothes. While the clothes seemed normal at first glance, closer inspection revealed that they were heavily infested with fleas. And those fleas carried the plague. The lethal virus soon spread, taking out much of the village, and the locals turned for help to their religious leadership. Their rector, William Mompesson, took charge and made it easier for the ill to separate themselves. Church services were also moved outside to reduce the spread of the virus, a rare example of early disease science. But it was clear that Eyam was one of the worst hotspots of the Black Plague, and any visiting merchants could spread the disease across the country. And so a fateful decision was made to seal the village away. In 1766, the entire village was quarantined with no interaction with the outside world until the disease had burned itself out. Local merchants would deliver goods and retrieve payment from dug holes filled with vinegar, used to disinfect the coins left inside. It's believed that in the end, the plague killed nearly 75% of 350 villagers, although there were some surprising survivors, like the village gravedigger. And today, historians consider Eyam's sacrifice to be one of the most significant moments in the history of the Black Plague. But there was one part of history that had more heroes than any other. Number 9. The Four Chaplains. World War II was by far the costliest, bloodiest war in human history, starting with genocide and carpet bombing and ending with a pair of earth-shattering explosions. But amidst all that, there were still some heroes who never picked up a gun. Among them were a quartet of men who served aboard the SS Dorchester, a United States troop ship. It carried around 900 troops and 4 chaplains: George L. Fox, a Methodist minister; Alexander Goode, a Reform rabbi; Clark Poling, a Baptist minister; and John Patrick Washington, a Catholic priest. They ministered to the diverse religious needs of the large crew, and when disaster struck, they answered the call of God. German U-boats had been monitoring the ship, and the crew was warned to keep their life jackets on. Sadly, many ignored the orders due to discomfort, and on February 3, 1943, the ship was torpedoed. It was critically damaged, knocking out the ship's electric system. The crew were in a panic, but the chaplains sprung into action. They guided wounded men to the lifeboats first, and then aided in the general evacuation. But it was soon clear that there wouldn't be enough life jackets for everyone on board. So one by one, the chaplains removed their own life jackets. Eyewitnesses report that the chaplains refused to board the lifeboats, which were quickly filling up. Instead, they continued to load people onto the ships, as long as there were seats. From there, they simply began praying, singing hymns in the different languages of their faith: English, Hebrew, and Latin. They went down with the ship, tragically, along with many others. Only 230 of the 900 crew members were rescued, due to the limited capacity, and many of them owe their lives to the 4 chaplains. The chaplains never held a gun, but these men made the most of theirs. Number 8. John R. Fox. World War II wasn't exactly easy for the soldiers, and if you were black, you probably had more of a hard time than your colleagues. Not only did the enemy want you dead, but you were treated poorly by your own countrymen, and your segregated unit was likely to get some of the worst missions. But that didn't stop many from giving their all for their country that didn't do the same, including John Robert Fox, a 29-year-old Ohio man fighting in the Italian theater of World War II, a region overrun by German soldiers. The odds were long, but Fox was determined to make the most of them. A member of the Buffalo Soldiers, Lieutenant Fox was part of a forward observer party that had volunteered to stay behind and fight the German soldiers to allow the rest of the unit to advance. The Americans in the area were heavily outnumbered, and it didn't take long for Fox to realize that he probably wasn't making it out of this one alive. The Germans were pouring into the village, and his unit was going to be overwhelmed quickly, so he radioed the artillery team to direct their fire right at his firing position. The soldier who received the message was a close friend of Fox's, and he was horrified. But Fox repeated his order and said, "There is more of them than there are of us. Give them hell." The soldier fired, and Fox was killed in the ensuing barrage, taking about 100 German soldiers with him. This gave time for the U.S. forces to make a comeback, and the U.S. soon recaptured the village. Fox's sacrifice would go largely unknown for decades, but he would be awarded the Medal of Honor in 1997, along with many other overlooked black soldiers. And he wasn't the only hero from this era who took a lot of enemies with him. Number 7. Ben Louis Solomon. Jewish soldiers played a key role in World War II, no doubt many of them looking forward to getting their shot at facing down a Nazi. One of them was Benjamin Louis Solomon, a Wisconsin man and former Eagle Scout who had trained as a dentist. But Uncle Sam came calling in 1940 and Solomon joined up with the Army. After rising through the ranks, he became an officer in the Army Dental Corps and was stationed in a hospital in Saipan where he spent most of his time working on the teeth of his fellow soldiers. But eventually a very different skill was needed. Solomon didn't see combat until June 1944 when the island was invaded. With no time for cavity repair during an active war zone, Solomon volunteered to replace the unit's field surgeon who had been injured. Casualties quickly piled up for the 2nd Battalion, and Solomon's aid station was only yards from the peak combat zone. It was clear that this unit was going to be overrun, so Captain Solomon stepped up, ordered the wounded to be evacuated, and took his position behind an M1917 machine gun. And he made this a very painful trip to the dentist for the enemy. Solomon laid down cover fire on the Japanese soldiers, holding them off long enough for the unit to evacuate. When the army got back to the area days later, they found Captain Solomon dead by the machine gun with a horrific array of wounds. He had suffered 76 bullet wounds and dozens of bayonet wounds, many of which he likely took while he was still alive. But what was more shocking was the 98 enemy troops laying dead on the ground in front of him. While it took decades, his bravery would ultimately be recognized with a Medal of Honor in 2002. And sometimes all it takes is one act to put you in the history books. Number 6. Teddy Sheean. Australia might have been fairly far away from the main combat theaters, but that didn't shield it in World War II, as the country was heavily targeted by Japanese attacks, and many Australian soldiers joined the fight, including Teddy Sheean. Born in Tasmania in 1923, he was the youngest of 14 people and was working as a farm laborer when he was 18 and war came calling. He enlisted in the Royal Australian Naval Reserve, following in the footsteps of 5 of his older brothers, and he was sent to a base in Hobart for his training. But it wouldn't be long before the war found him. He was stationed at Garden Island Naval Base, HMAS Penguin, and would be granted some leave to visit his family. But while he was away, the island was attacked by Japanese submarines. Sheean returned to base and joined a newly commissioned ship as an anti-aircraft gun loader. He would serve admirably aboard the ship, taking on escort duties and keeping an eye out for enemies. But the ship would soon be detailed to the larger combat operations in Timor, and that's where Teddy would enter history. While aboard the HMAS Armidale, the ship was evacuating soldiers when it was hit with bad weather and then targeted by Japanese aircraft. 2 torpedoes tore through the ship, and an evacuation order was given. As Sheean was helping load a life raft, the aircraft doubled back and fired, hitting him several times. Knowing he was mortally wounded, Sheean scrambled to the nearby anti-aircraft gun and unloaded at the planes in the sky, giving his fellow soldiers cover as they evacuated. He successfully landed a direct shot, bringing it down as the Armidale sank below the waves, taking Teddy Sheean with it and earning him a place as one of Australia's most iconic war heroes. But no World War II hero made the impact of this one more than once. Number 5. John Basilone. A tough-as-nails Italian lad from Buffalo, New York, John Basilone grew up as the 6th of 10 siblings and dropped out before high school. But what he lacked in book learning, he made up for in grit, and enlisted in the U.S. Army when he was only 17. A champion boxer, he first served during peacetime and fell in love with the Philippines, where he was posted. So with World War II looming, he enlisted again in the U.S. Marines and joined the Pacific Theater station in Guadalcanal, and he quickly earned his first honors. In September 1942, Basilone's unit came under attack by a band of 3,000 Japanese soldiers. Basilone led 2 sections of machine guns, fighting through hostile ground to obtain supplies. When the ammo ran out, he used his pistol and machete to hold off the Japanese soldiers and was recognized as one of the early war's greatest heroes. He received the Medal of Honor, became a celebrity, and was used by the military to promote war bonds once he returned to the United States. But fame never sat well with him. He was a soldier born, and the war wasn't finished. In 1943, Basilone was offered a position as a military instructor and officer, but turned it down. He asked to return to the war. He was promoted to gunnery sergeant before he was assigned to the division that would lead the invasion of Iwo Jima. Basilone took up his favorite position at the seat of the machine gun and single-handedly took out a Japanese garrison. But as he moved a Marine tank through a minefield while under heavy attack, he was hit by enemy fire and killed instantly. But his bold advance played a key role in helping the Americans win this critical battle. He was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for a soldier who wouldn't go home until the war was done. World War II created its share of heroes, but the rest of history saw plenty as well. Number 4. Jan Van Speyk. Let's turn the clock back to the early 1800s, where Jan Van Speyk was a fast-rising figure in the Netherlands Navy. Having secured the Dutch East Indies, he fought pirates and gained a quick reputation as a feared warrior. But back home, trouble was brewing. The Belgian independence movement was threatening succession, and the Dutch military responded in force. Van Speyk was detailed back home, and he hated the movement with a passion. He once vowed to die rather than become a Belgian, and he meant it. It was February 5, 1831, and his gunboat was under attack, not from the Belgians, but from Mother Nature. A powerful wind blew him off course and directly into the port of Antwerp. Soon he was stormed by Belgian rebels who took over his ship. They issued a demand totally unacceptable to the Dutch patriot: lower the Dutch flag and acknowledge their sovereignty. To which Van Speyk responded by firing his gun into a barrel of gunpowder, sending the ship sky high, and he struck the most decisive blow in the war. The ship was engulfed in flames, and he reportedly took dozens of Belgian soldiers with him, although he probably didn't ask his crewmen, 28 of which perished as well. But Van Speyk was regarded as a hero in the Netherlands, being heavily decorated posthumously. Even today, there's a decree that as long as the Dutch Navy exists, there will always be a ship named after the military's most fearless commander. It's one thing to do an act of heroism on your own turf, but another to venture into enemy territory. Number 3. Yonatan Netanyahu. It was the 1970s, and it was an age of hijackings. Planes were regularly captured by terrorists and militants and flown into foreign countries. One of the most infamous of the era was the hijacking of an Air France flight from Tel Aviv to Paris by a combination of militants and communist radicals. They diverted the plane to Uganda, which was ruled by the infamous dictator Idi Amin. An avowed enemy of Israel, the dictator took the 106 Israeli passengers and crew hostage. They threatened to kill the hostages if prisoners were not released in exchange. But Israel refused to acquiesce and launched one of the riskiest operations in its history. The raid would be known as Operation Entebbe, and it would involve an Israeli team infiltrating deep into Uganda, thousands of miles from home. With the cooperation of Kenya, Israel placed a team of commandos near the base where the hostages were being held, and a unit led by 30-year-old officer Yonatan Netanyahu would assault the base. They used a combo of cargo planes and Boeing jets to land the team, and prepared for one of the most dangerous missions they had ever been on. And it would be a stunning success, with only one fallen soldier. Netanyahu took the lead, engaging in an initial firefight with a group of hijackers. He took enemy fire, but this allowed the rest of the team to enter the base and subdue both groups of hijackers. All but 4 of the hostages were rescued alive, with 3 being killed by enemy fire and 1 elderly hostage being accidentally left behind. Yonatan Netanyahu's leadership pulled off one of the most impressive rescues in history, making him one of Israel's greatest military heroes. But sometimes there is no way to stop a disaster, and all you can do is try to save lives. Number 2. Patrick Vince Coleman. The year was 1971, and Patrick Vince Coleman was working as a train dispatcher for the Canadian Government Railways. It was an ordinary day until things went sideways in the most epic fashion. Coleman had a strong safety record, having previously stopped a runaway train years earlier, but in the early hours of the morning there was a collision in the harbor off Halifax between a Norwegian ship, the SS Eyam, and the SS Mont Blanc, a French munition ship, carrying a massive amount of explosives. The French crew abandoned the ship and it drifted into the harbor, and soon word got out into the harbor that the ship was primed to explode. A soldier warned Coleman of the danger, who quickly realized that an overnight express train from New Brunswick was scheduled to arrive shortly. Coleman turned back and contacted another terminal agent to send a message to all incoming ships: avoid Halifax. The message read, "Hold up the train, ammunition ship in harbor making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys." The trains were stopped shortly before a massive explosion ripped through the harbor, killing Coleman and over 1,700 other people in what would be one of the worst disasters in Canadian history. But no heroic action might have had more impact than this one. Number 1. The heroes of Flight 93. The 9/11 terror attacks killed almost 3,000 people and kicked off a decades-long war on terror. But they were almost much worse. 19 hijackers targeted 4 planes, with teams of 5 taking over 3 and flying them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. But the 4th didn't. It had only 4 hijackers instead of 5. Some believe a missing 5th was arrested or missed the flight, and that difference might have been what gave the passengers a chance to fight back. It ultimately crashed in a Pennsylvania field, but that is not where it was meant to land. It's believed the plane was intended for either the White House or more likely the U.S. Capitol, taking out another American icon and possibly killing a massive number of elected officials. But it never reached its target because the passengers on board successfully fought back. No one's 100% sure of who played a key role of the passengers on board, but it's believed that Jeremy Glick, Mark Bingham, Thomas Burnett, and Todd Beamer, whose famous line "Let's roll" was heard on the black box, played a key role. It took years to piece together the events of Flight 93, But investigators now believe that the passengers successfully overwhelmed the 4 armed hijackers and planned to have a retired pilot land the plane. But when they attacked the hijacker who was flying the plane to DC, he managed to spin the steering wheel, placing the plane in a tailspin and sending it crashing to the ground, taking all 40 heroic souls on board with it. And while they were added to the list of 9/11 casualties, we'll never know how many hundreds or thousands weren't on the list because of them. There's nothing like going out in a blaze of glory, but some warriors stared death down and lived to tell the tale. Watch most badass Medal of Honor recipients of all time to find out how they defied the odds and became legends, or click on this video instead.